Lena had worked the late shift at the diner more times than she could count. Greasy tables, coffee refills, and the sound of the bell above the door were part of her nightly routine. By the time she finished wiping down counters and locking the door, it was well past midnight. Normally, she would catch the last train into the city, but that night she was too late. The station was empty, the tracks silent, and her phone screen warned she had less than 5% battery. She felt a wave of frustration. Walking home wasn't an option, it was too far, and the streets around the station were not safe. That's when she saw it. A bus parked near the corner, its engine idling softly. The sign above it glowed faintly, the words almost unreadable through the foggy glass. After a moment, she could just make out Route 66, last stop. Something about it felt wrong. She hadn't seen this bus before, and she knew most of the routes. Still, standing alone in the cold was worse. She hurried toward it, clutching her bag tightly. The driver didn't greet her. He simply gave a short nod and slid the ticket machine across the counter. His face was shadowed beneath the brim of a cap. Lena hesitated, but dropped a few crumpled bills into the slot. The ticket printer didn't make a sound, but the driver waved her through anyway. Inside, the bus smelled of damp fabric and old dust. 2 passengers sat silently. A man in a gray suit leaned forward with his hands clasped, eyes darting nervously at the floor. A woman sat near the back, by the window, humming softly to herself, her face turned away. Lena chose a seat near the middle. She glanced out the window as the bus pulled away. At first, the streets looked familiar, but soon the scenery blurred. Streetlights disappeared one by one until there was nothing outside but blackness. The reflection of the bus interior became the only thing she could see in the glass. Her mother's old words came back to her. "Don't ever get on the last bus, Lena. If you miss the train, wait for morning. The last bus doesn't take you where you want to go." Lena had laughed at the superstition back then, but as the bus rolled into the darkness, her laughter felt very far away. The silence inside the bus felt heavy, as if the air itself was pressing down on everyone. The hum of the engine and the faint squeak of the brakes were the only sounds breaking through. Lena kept her eyes on the empty aisle, trying not to stare at the other passengers, but she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that hung over them. The man in the gray suit shifted suddenly, leaning forward as though he was about to stand. His hands trembled against the metal bar of the seat. Finally, he spoke, his voice sharp and impatient. "How long until we reach the city?" he asked the driver. The words cut through the silence like a blade. The driver didn't respond. He didn't even turn his head. His hands gripped the wheel, steady and unyielding. The man repeated the question, louder this time, frustration rising in his tone. "How long? I said how long?" Still nothing. No glance, no acknowledgement. The humming woman in the back shifted slightly. Her song grew louder, just enough for Lena to hear the strange melody. It wasn't any tune she recognized. It was low, sharp, almost taunting. The man slammed his hand against the side of the bus. "Hey, answer me!" His voice echoed through the hollow space. But before Lena could process the moment, the humming woman laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even directed at him. But the sound was cruel, unnatural, like nails dragged across glass. The man spun in his seat, glaring at her. "What's so funny?" he snapped. She didn't reply. She just kept smiling faintly at the window, her eyes reflecting the dim overhead light. Lena felt her pulse quicken. The atmosphere had shifted completely. The bus was no longer just silent. It was hostile. Then the man lost control. He stormed toward the driver, stomping down the aisle.
He grabbed the yellow cord above his head and yanked it repeatedly. Normally, it would trigger a bell, but this time, there was no sound, no response. He cursed under his breath, yanking again, his face growing red with panic. Reaching the driver's seat, he slammed his hand onto the metal railing. "Stop this damn bus," he shouted, grabbing the driver's shoulder. But the driver didn't move. His head stayed forward, cap low, eyes hidden. The man's face froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He staggered backward, as if pushed by something unseen. Lena gasped, but before she could blink, he was gone. His seat was empty. His bag, his coat, everything gone. The humming stopped. The woman slowly turned her head toward Lena. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Lena noticed that the woman's pupils weren't right. They seemed to stretch unnaturally, glinting faintly in the darkness. The smile spread wider. Lena sank lower into her seat, her breath shallow. She wanted to move, to run, but she couldn't. The bus kept rolling forward, carrying her deeper into nowhere.
Lena hadn't moved for what felt like an hour. Her muscles ached from sitting rigid, but fear pinned her down harder than any seatbelt ever could. She kept her eyes fixed on the seat across from her, the one that had belonged to the man in the gray suit. It was still empty. The only proof he had ever been there was the slight indent in the old fabric. Her phone had died 10 minutes earlier. The black screen was now just another mirror reflecting her pale face. She considered standing, shouting, demanding answers, but her throat was tight and dry. She felt like if she said a single word, something terrible would happen. The bus rattled over bumps that shouldn't exist. She pressed her face against the glass, desperate to see where they were. Outside was still nothing. No streetlights, no road signs, not even trees. Just endless blackness stretching in every direction. It was like they weren't moving through a city at all. They were floating through a void. Her uncle's voice drifted into her memory. He used to tell her urban legends when she was younger, stories about people who boarded buses that never reached their destination. He claimed those buses appeared only to certain travelers, those who were too tired, too distracted, or too desperate to notice the difference. Once you were on, he said, there was no way off. She had laughed at him, the same way she laughed at her mother's superstitions. But now those warnings felt like prophecy. A soft sound made her flinch. It was humming again, closer this time. She whipped her head toward the back of the bus. The woman wasn't in her seat. Lena's heart stopped. The space where she had been sitting was empty. Lena slowly turned forward, her eyes wide, afraid of what she might see. At first, the aisle looked clear. Then she heard it, breathing, faint but deliberate, coming from behind her seat. The humming returned, almost in her ear now. She forced herself to glance over her shoulder. Nothing. The aisle stretched out empty, but she could feel it. Someone was standing right behind her, leaning close. Her breath caught. She bolted upright, stumbling toward the front of the bus. The driver's mirror caught her eye. For the first time, she looked directly into it, desperate for a glimpse of his face. But the mirror didn't show him. It showed only the steering wheel and the empty seat where he should have been. Her stomach dropped. The bus was moving on its own. She gripped the metal pole to steady herself, her body trembling. Then she froze. A reflection appeared in the mirror. Not the driver's, not hers. It was the woman. She was standing just behind Lena, her wide grin stretching unnaturally as her eyes gleamed in the flickering light.
Lena stumbled back from the driver's mirror, her pulse hammering in her ears. She no longer cared if her movements were loud. The realization that the bus was steering itself, carrying her deeper into a nowhere that didn't belong on any map, shattered whatever fragile calm she had left. The humming woman was gone again, or at least Lena couldn't see her, but the sound of that cruel little melody drifted in and out of the stale air, sometimes behind her, sometimes at the far end of the bus, and sometimes directly in her head. She clutched the cold railing as she forced herself to the front door. "Stop the bus!" she shouted, her voice cracking. For the first time all night, she broke the silence. But it didn't matter. The vehicle roared forward, as if it hadn't heard her. She slammed her hand against the door, but it didn't budge. Her palms stung. The lights above flickered, each one dying out one by one, starting from the back of the bus. Lena turned in horror as the darkness crept forward, swallowing seats, swallowing space. In that thick, unnatural blackness, she thought she saw figures, shapes leaning into the aisle, hollow eyes glinting faintly. The man in the gray suit was there again, but his face was blank, stretched into something inhuman. Behind him were others, their outlines sharp but their features distorted, like broken photographs. All of them watching her. The bus hissed and slowed. For one fragile second, relief flooded through her. The brakes groaned, the door creaked, and cold night air brushed her skin as the door opened. Without thinking, Lena ran. Her shoes hit ground, but it wasn't pavement, it was dirt. She stumbled forward into a wide, empty field, the grass whispering against her legs. The air smelled damp, heavy, unnatural. She turned, expecting to see the bus parked behind her, but it was already gone. The space it had occupied was empty, just darkness and grass. Her breath came in gasps. She turned in every direction, searching for a road, a house, any sign of life. There was nothing. No stars, no moon, only the shifting grass under a sky that looked too blank to be real. Then came the hiss again. She whipped around, but there was no bus. Instead, she saw movement in the field. The man in the gray suit stood about 10 feet away, his body rigid, his mouth open in silent scream. The humming woman appeared beside him, smiling that same impossible smile. Slowly, others emerged from the dark, the passengers from the photos she hadn't seen. Travelers like her, their faces hollow, their bodies stiff, all watching her. Lena tried to scream, but her throat locked. Her legs refused to move. The field closed in around her, the grass taller now, brushing her shoulders, suffocating. The hiss of brakes came one last time, louder than ever. She turned toward the sound, but there was nothing, only blackness swallowing her whole. The next morning, the bus stop where Lena had boarded was empty. Witnesses said no buses ran through that street anymore. Route 66 hadn't existed in decades, and no one ever saw Lena again.